Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a graph that looks like this in first Microsoft Excel and then in Google Sheets. If you are wanting to learn how to graph in Google Sheets, make sure to still watch parts of the Excel video because I move faster in the Google Sheets tutorial assuming that you've learned the basic concepts from the Excel tutorial. To get started, open a blank Excel document. In the top two cells, the boxes are called cells, write X and Y or whatever variables you are measuring. Underneath each heading, insert your data. For this demonstration, I'm going to use X values of 1 to 10 and then square them to get my Y values. Once you have your data entered in, click and hold in the top left data cell so that you can drag the cursor to select all of the data values. With all of your data values selected, navigate to the Insert tab in the top part of the window, then move over to the Charts part of the screen. Excel has a lot of different charts to choose from: bar graphs, histograms, pie charts, and so forth. But to show the two variables together, you want to select the Scatter chart option. Don't select the lines, select the scatter. Now you have a graph showing the relationship between X and Y. In this next part, I'm going to show you how to linearize the data so that you can add a line of best fit, also known as a trend line. We're going to start with linearizing the data. When we linearize data, we want to try and make the data follow a straight linear line. To do this, we need to examine the relationship between X and Y. If we look at our graph, it appears to be quadratic, which we can confirm by looking at the data values. Therefore, to linearize the X values, we want to graph Y with respect to X squared. To do this, we will use Excel to write an equation. Click in cell C2. We are going to write a formula. To write a formula, type the equal sign, then the opening parenthesis, then click on cell A2, then type the closing parenthesis, and finally type a caret, which is Shift 6, 2. What this says is set the value of this cell, C2, equal to the value of cell A2 squared. Hit enter when you are done typing and you will notice it will output a 1 because 1 squared is 1. Now instead of writing this equation over and over again, you'll notice that when you select cell C2, there is a little tiny green box in the bottom right corner of the outline. Click and drag that down to C11 and it will adjust the formula for each cell. I'm going to label this new set of data as X squared. To apply this new data set to the graph, click on the graph but not on any of the points or the title of the graph. You will see a tab called Chart Design appear. Click on that tab and then towards the right side of the screen you will see a Select Data button. Click that button and in the pop-up window, click on the X values bar. Do not try to use the entire chart range that is at the top of that pop-up. When you click in the X values box, you will be able to select your X squared values. Once you've selected them, click OK. You will see the changes take effect on your chart. To add a trend line or line of best fit, click on the graph again to get the Chart Design tab to appear. This time, click on the leftmost button that says Add Chart Element. Scroll down to Trend Line and select the linear. You will now have a line of best fit on your chart. We will now transition into formatting your graph. When it comes to formatting your graph, the general rule of thumb is to click on the element you want to format and click on the Format tab in Excel. There will be many presets that you can choose from, and if that isn't enough, you can select the Format Pane button and choose from even more options, like whether you want to display an equation, how thick you want the trend line to be, etc. You can also add more elements to your chart by going back to Chart Design and Add Elements. You could add axes labels, a legend, and more. You can also take away elements by finding them in that list and then unchecking them. Finally, if you want to format the entire graph, you can either change the colors by clicking on the Colors button, or apply a pre-made style. Creating a graph in Google Sheets is very similar to creating a graph in Excel. I've already got my linearized data inserted into the spreadsheet, and I want to graph it against my y values. To do this, I'm going to click the Insert Chart button. It is in the same bar as the text formatting and just farther right. It will immediately create a bar graph of y and x squared. To change it to a scatter plot, navigate to the chart editor, make sure you're on the Setup tab, and under Chart Type, scroll and select Scatter. We aren't quite finished yet since it is plotting both y and x squared against x. To change this, you want to go to the x-axis menu and select Edit. Looking at the top and left bars, we see our x squared data is in the C column. Select the first cell of x values and the last cell of x values separated by a colon. In this case, I want my x values to be C1 colon C11. And even though it doesn't show up, we want to remove the x squared dataset from acting as a dependent variable. To do this, move over to the Series tab, find x squared, click the three dots, and select Remove. You can customize the chart by clicking Customize in the chart editor. To add a line of best fit, click on Series in the Customize tab. Scroll down a little bit and check the trend line box. You can then customize your line of best fit. Add error bars to your graphs in Excel. This is something you can only do in Excel. Unfortunately, you cannot do in Google. You can check out our video on how to install Microsoft Office if you do not have Excel. But let's get to error bars to your graph, which is something that is required in all IB IAs. So if you're taking an IB science class and you have to complete an IA, this is a useful skill to have. It's also just useful to know in general when reporting data from labs. So to begin, you want to make sure that you have your data. So I have my X data, which is pressure here, and I have my Y data, which is impulse here. You can see that in this graph right here. The other thing you want to make sure you have before creating this graph is you want to have your uncertainties. So my uncertainties are a little out of order. I have uncertainty for pressure, which is my X uncertainty in the second column, my uncertainty for impulse in the first column. But as long as you know which is your X and which is your Y uncertainty, you are good. You should be taught how to calculate these uncertainties by your IB science teacher. So to start out, I'm going to just select the regular data, not the uncertainties. I'm going to go to Insert. This little chart-like thing here that has a few dots, it says XY scatter. If you hover, click it, and just choose the first scatter option. And you'll get a graph that looks like this. Now, you'll notice that the data is very condensed in this one little region, whereas with my graph here, it's more spread out. You'll also notice, though, that on this graph here, it starts at 150,000 instead of 0 on my x-axis, whereas here it starts at 0. So I'm just going to start by changing that just to spread the data out a little more. You will not be penalized if you do that. So if you look here, you have the bounds. And so you have minimum, maximum. And so I'm just going to change my minimum, let's see, to 150,000. All of a sudden you'll see that the graph now looks more spread out. Just like this graph here. Alright, the next thing I want to do is add my trend line to this graph. So I will just go to Add Chart Element, Trend Line, and select Linear. Normally you want to insert a linear trend line, however if your data looks like it could be exponential or logarithmic, obviously add that trend line instead. Alright, I'm just going to format this line. Usually IB prefers that this is not a dotted line, so I'm going to go over here and click the little paint bucket, and I'm going to choose dash type and choose a solid line, and then it normally looks best if it is black. Now we're going to add the error bars to this. So what you want to do is you want to find one of your points on the graph and select it. You will now see that you have a format data series, and over here you want to come to the three bars of the series, or you want to select the data, sorry, go to add chart element and select error bars. And you just want to click standard error, it doesn't matter, we're going to be adjusting it anyway. And so for right now you'll see that they've made up their own error, but we have our error right here, and we want all of this to reflect on this graph. And so what you can do is just select, let's start with the X, select any of the X error bars, and when you click it, you see that you can format the error bars. Now this is when you want to go to the 3 bars and format. And what you want to do is, since we have calculated our error, we want to do custom. And you can specify this value. And so since this is our X data, for the positive error value, just click on your first one and scroll down, right? And since it's the same positive and negative, just click in the negative, drag and scroll again. When you click OK, you will see that the error is different for the different, ever so slightly different for the X values. Now the same thing can be done in the Y direction with impulse. Select the Y error bars, come back over to the format error bars, custom, specify value. For positive error, select your Y errors, and for negative, select your Y errors again. OK, and now you can see that my custom error is reflected in your graph. The last aspect that IB typically wants when you are putting error bars is the linear error bars that sort of encompass your trend line, or the error. Those error trend lines, like the bars on this graph, let me move the graph down so you can actually see. The ones that go like this, we need to figure out what this value is here and what these values are here. So looking at the Y, so from here to here and there, you need those 4 points. So what you're going to do to figure out those 4 points is you're first going to figure out what this point is right here. So I noticed that that is my ball 5. It has a pressure of about 159,000, so it's falling right about there, and it has that 0.35, like this is that point, my ball 5. So I know that the error for this point in the Y direction is 0.09. So I know that this value up here is 0.35 plus 0.09, which is that 0.44 I have here. And I know that this point right here is 0.35 minus 0.09, which is this 0.26 that I have right there. Sorry, this is out of order. When I originally made my graphs, I was just thinking as I typed. It doesn't matter which order you put it in, as long as you make sure you leave room for 2 data points in each. With this being the first data point, you want that right here. Going over to this point is then my ball 1 with the pressure of about 192,000, falls right about there, and so that 0.86. When I look, this has an uncertainty of 0.1, so I know that up here 0.86 plus 0.1 is 0.96, which I've denoted here. And this value down here would be 0.86 minus 0.1, which is this 0.76. So something important to mention with the data is when you're grouping, you've noticed I've labeled this max and min. I consider the error bar that crosses from the bottom of your lowest point to the top of your highest point the max one, as it's going to have the max slope. And I consider the error trend line that goes from the top of your lowest point to the bottom of your highest point the min trend line, as it has the smallest slope. And so that's what I denote here. But on that note, you want to make sure that this point and this point are grouped together. So right here, and you want to make sure that this point and this point are grouped together as they are right here. And here you just want to make sure you put in the x values, and so I did something slightly different on my previous graph that was incorrect. So I want to make sure that for 0.26 is still this 1,500 or 159,000, and that for this graph, or for 0.96, which is up here, it's 192,000. And we'll go down and do the same thing here. So for this 0.44, it's still 159,000. And then for the top highest point, the x value stays the same as 192,000. Not that many zeros. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the graph. We're going to go to Format, Chart Design, sorry, and select Data. What you're going to do here is you're going to go down to this plus and click Add a Series. We want this series to be named Max Air. And so then you click in the X value. You do not click Chart Data Range up here. Do not click up here. Over here, instead, click in the X values. And for my max, these are my X values. For the Y, click on your Y errors that we found. Click and hold and drag to select those. And just click OK. And so now you have these 2 points right there exactly where we want them. We will do the same thing with the min. So we'll go back, select the chart, select data, add another series. We'll name this series min error. For the x values, make sure you select the x values. Mine are out of order. I apologize again for that. And then make sure you select the y values as well. If you click OK, you'll again notice you have the 2 points right where we want them. Before we get going with the trend line, we're just going to make these points not orange and gray. Normally when you look at these error graphs, they do not have the orange and gray points. So to do this, just click on the points themselves, click on the marker, and you want to first select fill, no fill, then border, no line. And all of a sudden you will notice that they are gone, they are no longer on the plot. Do the same thing with the gray ones. So click it, the format, marker, fill, no fill, and border, no line. Finally, click on the graph. Under chart design, add a chart element. You'll want to select trend line, linear. And now you'll notice that since we've added the data, it asks you what series we want to add it to. So let's start with max air. If we click max air, you'll notice now that there's a trend line that goes between those 2 points. Same thing, we'll do it one more time for the min air, add trend line, linear, min air. You'll see that there are those 2 trend lines now. So for formatting again with the line, make sure you click on it, the paint bucket, solid dash. Again, click on the min one, solid dash, those are 2 important keys. And I'd recommend changing this orange to the same gray as the other. I'm guessing it's this gray. You want to make sure that you've labeled the slopes or the equations for each line. So to do that, just click on each trend line, double click it so you get this Format Trend Line panel, and you simply need to click Display Equation on Chart. And so I'm just going to repeat that here, Display Equation on Chart, and here, Display Equation on Chart. The last little tip I'm going to give you is that for IB, I'm going to label, since this is for that max air trend line, I'm just going to label this max and label this one min, just so that the viewers know exactly which corresponds with each. And one friendly reminder before ending that for the IA graph, you want to make sure that your axes are labeled and that you have a title. If you didn't have this before, it's very easy to add by just going to Add Chart Element, going Axes, Titles, etc.